Welcome to Profiteers versus the People, the show where we punch up and dispel myths. Okay.
It's the show where we dispel myths. Welcome.
Welcome to Profiteers versus the People, the show where we punch up and dispel myths surrounding modern great people.
For the uninitiated, we take the very rich, particularly those with a media presence like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or the Mowbrays, who are some New Zealand billionaires, our Kiwis down there, know exactly who we're talking about. Everyone else, check out our series on them. Anyways, we take them and we put them through our PR torture test and see if they come out on crutches, our PR torture test acronym.
C stands for consumer harm. R stands for rich parents. U for union suppression and employee abuse. T for tax avoidance or tax dependency. The second C for child labor allegations. The H for harassment allegations. The E for egregious behavior after hours. And the S for slap suits and journalist suppression. I'm Money Mike.
And I'm Rad Bill. And in our last episode, we went to some pains to discuss Nestle's involvement in the cocoa trade and the associated atrocities being committed industry-wide. We did our best to single out Nestle, but we kept having to use refrains like Nestle and the other players, quote unquote, because although Nestle's behavior is atrocious, they're hardly ever acting alone. Like, there's a whole industry behind all of those atrocities, and they're just one of the starring leads. Their face is on the poster and everything, but they're not the ones really working the cogs here.
But they still suck.
They still suck. Yeah.
It does not exonerate them at all.
Yes. When it comes to coffee, and the stuff we're going to discuss about coffee, the crimes being carried out are mostly being carried out by Nestle. Because Nestle is the biggest supplier of coffee in the entire world, and it's kind of not even close.
Which I had no idea. Genuinely did not know that.
I didn't until I started researching this episode. I was like, it's Starbucks, right? Like, definitely. Or some, whatever Starbucks calls itself in Europe. I'm sure it's huge over there, just under a different name. But no.
Interesting.
Nestle's the biggest, and it is a blowout. So, in this one, when we mention Nestle, and don't follow it with and the other bad actors, it's because everyone else in the game is just tiny, relatively speaking. And don't give us any of that, well, what about Starbucks stuff? We just touched this. Is Starbucks bad? Yeah, but believe it or not, the runner-up to Nestle, market share-wise, is Peet's.
Huh.
Which kind of blows me away. I can't believe that Peet's got past one cafe because their coffee is, like, bad as far as I'm concerned.
My mom loves Peet's so much. She would go out of the way to get Peet's. Now, I'm wondering with all of this market share stuff, Starbucks is kind of in a separate category because their model is different. There's no Nestle cafe.
That's true.
They are a direct to consumer model. While Starbucks has that, I am assuming that the bulk of their sales are in their
cafes.
Yeah.
I could see that. There's a pie chart in one of our sources that shows market share among players in retail coffee sales. And to your point, yeah, like Starbucks is a cafe chain. But in terms of retail coffee sales, Nestle represents a quarter of all of it. JDE Peet's, which is Peet's parent company, has 10%, and Starbucks carries less than 3%.
Huh.
And it's just lumped in with everyone in the others category. JDE Peet's share of the instant coffee market holds at 10%, but Nestle's share of this segment balloons to over a third. Now, there's a reason for this market domination. Nestle invented a huge segment for coffee consumers, instant coffee.
Well, sort of. That's how it always is with a big company invented something. So instant coffee had been around for hundreds of years in one form or another. It just hadn't ever really looked or tasted good, if you can say that instant coffee tastes good. I'm sure that people were rapping 400 times in the last few centuries, but it really didn't start actually sounding good until 1979 for a similar reason. The world kind of needs to be ready for this sort of thing.
That's it. And this sort of thing for coffee, mind you, was sad people hustle culture coffee. Like, we need to take something that people tend to enjoy, and we need to make it something that they can drink while sad in the car. When I was a kid, good coffee tasted gross, but instant coffee tasted sad. And I'm not that old, and this was the product.
I'm trying to think of the list of things that I would rather drink to get a caffeine fix than instant coffee. And nothing is like jumping out to me just because of the vast pool of things that I would rather drink instead of instant coffee, because it smells and tastes like the unappreciated hardship of being a parent. Like,
yes.
It smells like being overwhelmed. It smells like struggle and tastes like sadness. And I feel like it can only be truly appreciated with a crumpled up cigarette.
Yes, that's the taste you get when you put unnecessary strain on someone else's marriage.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was introduced in Britain, and then it eventually made a debut in the US in like 1851 during the Civil War. Now at this time, Nestle was too young to do anything about this, so they didn't. Fortunately for them, they'd get other chances. This is the trend, right? Like, it comes up in the Civil War, and then it dissipates when the Civil War ends. Each time we got back to work killing the shit out of each other, instant coffee was reinvented. And everyone hated it, but you know what? This is the best we've got. And this continued well into the 1900s. But it didn't really, gain traction until World War I.
And yet again, Nestle is not in on the action. But fortunately, well, for them, they were afforded another shot a few years later when the sequel aired.
Although the opportunity at this point for any extremely wealthy corporations was probably obvious, the idea still had to be sort of spoon-fed to Nestle because they'd taken a hit in the Depression and took another at the outset of World War II. In this case, Brazil had the spoon, specifically the Brazilian Coffee Institute, a trade group had the spoon, because Brazil was struggling with a problem that cacao farmers have struggled with on and off for decades. They had an enormous surplus of coffee and no means of storing the stuff long term. So to sell it, they needed a fucking miracle.
It was Nestle.
The chairman at the time, Luis Dapples, he was approached by the organization and urged to create a flavorful, soluble coffee product.
Now, remember, just like every time someone from a corporation is told to invent something, it's already existed.
It's already out there.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, can you steal something and make it
they were
huge,
like,
please?
hey, there's this thing called a wheel, but we'd really like you to reinvent it. And the stuff out there also wasn't very good.
And Nestle didn't change that either, by the way.
Yeah,
I mean, it started out shitty, and Nestle's like, here's shitty with a big marketing campaign behind it. I would ask our listeners here to recommend some tasty instant coffee, but at the end of this episode, the message will be clear, coffee bad. I can't stop drinking it, so maybe I just deserve my sad, shitty cup of instant coffee, and I'll just get it from not Nestle, right? Anyways, Nestle had the breakthrough the Brazilian Coffee Institute was hoping for in 1937, and soon after, the stuff began to gain popularity among the men protecting our country in the wilderness. When the American soldiers returned home, Nescafé, which Nestle's instant coffee arm had come to be known, had a reputation issue to tend to. The women who bought this coffee for their husbands after the war were seen as lazy, because it was the coffee they had in the trenches. So Nestle had to adjust its advertising to focus on the flavor of this instant coffee. And this, paired with the advent of the supermarket and the associated quick, easy, and relatively anonymous shopping, allowed instant coffee's sales for the first time really to grow in popularity outside of wartime. However, there was another issue that would come to challenge Nestle's reputation. But this one, the other foot on this one, it's not going to drop until Money Mike and Rad Bill are already alive.
Hey, Nestle, you're a Swiss company, which means you were all neutral in that war stuff that happened back there, but you were selling coffee to everyone, right?
So this is the question. You were supplying instant coffee to the Americans. You were not choosing sides, which is an insane position to be playing when Nazis are on one side of the table. Were you supplying any of that instant stuff to the Germans?
Well, not coffee.
That's right, not coffee. But Nestle did have factories in Germany and Nazi-occupied territories and fed both German citizenry and the German military food and sustained them, just not with coffee. And they were operating those factories under Nazi control, which meant that some of their partners and subsidiaries relied on, I mean, there's no surprise here, they're still doing this, slave labor, of course.
For the big corporates, this sort of playing both sides was a really common practice around this time. Coca-Cola and Ford were also secretly catering to the Nazis as a means to hedge their bets, but those companies also got in pretty serious trouble for it.
That wasn't a good look, with the war efforts. Everyone's rationing their food and everything, and they're hedging their bets by also helping out the other side in case they win. Not good, guys. And on this front, Nestle is no different. Maybe the following sounds familiar. But wait, those were our suppliers, and at least one subsidiary ultimately. How were we supposed to know they were relying on such atrocities? Nonetheless, the company acknowledged their role in this activity, and in the year 2000, they contributed $14.5 million to a settlement that totaled, because of all the other corporations that got busted doing this, that were based in Switzerland, $1.25 billion, still nothing. And that was agreed on by Switzerland's largest banks on behalf of all the other parties. Nestle was quoted as saying such, "As the legal successor of such corporations, Nestle nevertheless accepts its moral responsibility to help alleviate human suffering."
We're sorry.
We're sorry, guys. So as far as Nestle is concerned, this issue of the public's grievance with their behavior should be put to rest. Nestle didn't have a slavery or atrocity problem. It had a Nazi problem. And Nazis had a slavery problem, among other problems. But to this end, Nestle's involvement with Nazis and slavery, it's a thing of the past. The turn of the millennium marks a new dawn for Nestle, according to Nestle.
That's right. It's a new day for this scrappy multinational food corporation, and slavery in our supply chains is a thing of the past. But for good measure, don't bother searching Nestle and chocolate and slavery and 2001 or listen to our last PvP episode.
Part 3. And don't search coffee either.
Chapter 7.
So this time, we're going to use Nescafe and Nespresso as a through line to guide a deeper exploration of Nestle's employment practices. We'll start with what Nestle as a company seeks to portray, and we'll go as far into the depths as we can, reaching what appears to be a floor: complicity in the murder of employees. Nespresso especially will be a good point of reference all the while, because Nespresso is what's known as a B Corp, meaning they've committed to harnessing the power of business to do good.
So, join us in our descent, starting from what is visible to the customers.
Yes, starting with Nestle's take on its own treatment of employees and the presence of unions in the U.S. Here is a quote.
Nestle ensures that throughout any union organizing campaign, its representatives fully support these policies, as well as comply with local laws. In the United States specifically, Nestle has a long tradition of maintaining positive labor relations, with over 30 collective bargaining agreements in place. These agreements have been successfully negotiated in good faith with a variety of unions and no labor strikes in over 15 years.
Yes. And this was in response to an AFL-CIO report alleging that Nestle flew in union-busting HR reps from around the world for weeks in response to unionization efforts by the workforce in a McDonough, Georgia plant, which would have been the first unionized plant in the southeastern United States, mind you. So you have to read it like a clearly guilty person who has the favor of the courts. Nestle ensures that throughout any union organizing campaign, its representatives fully support these policies as well as comply with local laws.
You're right, Nestle. We forgive you.
So this should, for our listeners in the Southeast, hopefully add a bitter tinge just on a macro view to word that some European company is opening up shop there. Nestle was first to the party, but European companies are opening up shop in the Southeast in droves. And when you start looking into the benefits they offer to employees in Europe and the disparity between those benefits and the ones offered to U.S. employees in the Southeast, you start to see why. German companies offer 7 weeks paid vacation to German staff. In the U.S., in most cases, benefits are market consistent. Also, the laws or quote-unquote regulations are getting weaker, deregulated, if you will, which is another great reason for a big European conglomerate to move to the Southeast or open up a shop there.
Less accountability to the public, the better, right?
Yes, in the Southeast, when questioned on iffy practice, these European companies get to rely on a familiar refrain. We broke no laws. As a rule of thumb, when there isn't a strong regulatory environment and communities are fractured, the colonizers move in to take what they can, and in the southeastern U.S., they have only the press to fear.
God forbid another boycott of 74 should arise.
That's it. The McDonough plant case, by the way, has a happy ending with a caveat. Despite enormous pressure from HR, the staff eventually did vote to unionize with a great deal of support, apparently, from union members who worked in Nestle plants in Europe. As an aside, in Europe, Nestle honors their word and really don't fight unionization efforts, you see, because in Europe, they know to be scared of their staff.
An ununionized French workforce subjected to lousy workplace policy will just kidnap your ass.
That's it. Problem solved. They buddy up with their peers pretty damn quick. Now, negotiations with Nestle for a collective bargaining agreement for the U.S. as a whole are still ongoing. And Nestle has maintained the legality of its management holding, and this is a direct quote from the source, captive audience meetings to give employees, quote unquote, factual information. End that quote and end the quote that quote was in. Factual information, mind you, is things like the union, they just want your dues money. And, we don't have to agree to anything just because your union says that it needs to be agreed to by us. And by the way, bargaining, it can drag on for years. Now, as mentioned, Nestle has joined the other companies mentioned in the report to insist that these allegations are false. Because again, the two forces they have to contend with in the South are A, a series of limp-wristed and ineffectual laws, B, the press, which, unlike the government, can only be bought in a very literal macro sense, in large chunks, which means it's more formidable, and when you do buy it, it's more unwieldy. They do still have to contend with these press groups and this limp-wristed legislation, and those two work in tandem, though pathetically. Nestle, quote-unquote, follows the law, which means they're towing the line and doing the worst thing they're legally allowed to do. And when the press catches on, they have to engage and say things like, well, we broke no laws. We didn't break the law. Now, on the B side of those two forces working against them in the South is media coverage followed by change.
No, not really.
It's not. 6 Blue Bottle Coffee, this is their coffee chain, Nestle's. 6 Blue Bottle is the name of the chain. It's a bunch of coffee shops in Massachusetts. They unionized last year. For those listening in the distant future, that's 2024 they did that. And management's first move was to bring in Ogletree Deakins, a law firm that specializes in keeping the big corporates union-free. Since then, Blue Bottle has allegedly issued retaliatory write-ups to and fired union members and have sought to delay further negotiations wherever they possibly could. Though the environment Nestle is creating here is despicable, the solidarity building across the supply chain has been a source of encouragement and undoubtedly a source of cautionary motivation for newly enlisted union members in these cafes in Massachusetts. Alex Pine, VP of the Blue Bottle Independent Union, has had the opportunity to confer with members of the Sinal-Trainal Union in Columbia, and y'all, shit is different down there.
Yeah, though they're kind of for sale these days, the American press are still a foe that companies like Nestle could do without. There's been a lot of conversation about fake news and the media being unreliable. And big companies that are often outed by the media and news, they just can't get enough of that.
They can't. Oh, they love that shit. And there's also an entire arm of the news media that seems like it's ready to jump in and go, okay, well, that factory burnt down. And it's because the company didn't invest in the proper infrastructure and, because they hadn't coordinated with emergency services. But they did that to protect the shareholders. So I feel like there's a debate to be had here. They're waiting around every corner to do this shit. But at the end of the day, there seem to be a handful of unfuckwithable journalists that are really being a pain in the ass of just about every large corporation trying to get away with murder in the United States. And on that note, to truly understand how much protection we're getting from the press, one must observe the adversity faced by the Sineltrainal.
Chapter 8. Beyond the American media's watchful eye and the American government's weak, clammy grasp.
So Sineltrainal in Colombia is the union, we're probably mispronouncing it, to you brave folks down there fighting the good fight. We're with you. We're sorry. We looked up how to pronounce it. I
watched so many ads to figure out how to pronounce that word, and
YouTube thinks we have HIV. I don't know what we did to make them think that. I hope they're not right.
Do we have HIV? Yeah.
Do we? Yeah. What if the algorithm is powerful? Anyways, Sineltrainal is the union presence grappling with the cultivation component of Nestle's coffee supply chain and their milk supply chain and a lot of their other supply chains that have a point in Colombia. But let me tell you, this shit is dark. The union is 5,000 members strong. 1,800 of its members are employed by Nestle. In fact, the union was created by Nestle employees in the country in 1982, much to the chagrin of their employer, Nestle, who sought allegedly to prevent the union's registration in the first place. Where U.S. counterparts might fear stalling tactics, unfair treatment, the occasional threat, and unjustified firings, in Colombia, free from the threat of widespread media coverage, it would seem that for Nestle, the only thing to fear is fear itself. Also, at least for a while, attacks from revolutionary groups were a concern. So, perceptively for Nestle's colonial activities in the region, be that land grabs, displacement, and or employee abuse, the Florencia plant was almost completely destroyed. And by that, I mean, it wasn't a crisis that was diverted. There was a car bomb that destroyed most of the plant. I think it was empty when it happened. So I have a hard time putting stuff like this in the same camp as Killdozer, but it's just property damage. Profiteers versus the People does not condone car bombs.
We haven't broken any law.
The Florencia plant, which processed milk from local farmers, had sustained a smaller attack earlier that same week, it turns out, and would sustain another attack a year later, which couldn't be good for workplace culture. And in 2023, the plant was just shuttered with no compensation directed to any of the 90 employees and no efforts to direct employees to other plants in the region. In the world of worker rights, this is a pretty big no-no. Now, Nestle's plant in Mosquera produces pet food, think Purina, etc., and they appear to be the last bright spot in our piece on Colombia. In the past, Purina has been associated with the deaths of thousands of dogs as a result of poisoning the dog food. And in 2002, before acquiring the plant, Nestle demanded that the union be terminated and that all 400 employees, each of whom had an average tenure of 18 years at the plant, resign their position to make way for contract labor. Despite this, the Mosquera plant appears to be the only Nestle plant still operating in Colombia that I can't connect to some sort of assassination. Which brings us to the Dos Quebradas plant. Now, I might be mispronouncing this too, and if I am, I'm sorry. The Dos Quebradas plant focuses primarily on, surprise, surprise, cookies and chocolate. The sweeter the taste, the more brutal the cultivation tactics. Here we see some of the usual bad behavior: suspended positions, excessive surveillance, worker harassment, threats to terminate unless union membership is surrendered. But we also start to see some of the really scary shit. Where Nestle isn't able to outright eliminate the union presence, they turn those plants into camps for right-wing paramilitary forces.
Oh my.
Now this does two things. Number one, it subjects employees to constant contact with these mercenaries, meaning the goons have the ability to spread disinformation, rumors of betrayal or disloyalty, and of course to intimidate those that resist oppression. Number two, it gives Nestle a terrifying new weapon. When the plant is packed to the gills with members of a paramilitary death squad, as they're referred to in many of our sources, and the union begins making demands, Nestle can allegedly accuse union leadership of sabotage. And because Nestle plays such a massive role in the Colombian economy, these accusations can be punishable by, call it vigilante justice. Here's how this manifests itself. On the 21st of August 2009, likely while Nestle is considering some demands recently made by Sinaltrainal, Gustavo Gomez is at his house, and at 6:30, strangers knock on the door, and when Gustavo answers, in broad daylight, the assailants shoot him 10 times before apparently vanishing into thin air. They just got away. Now, this feels more premeditated than the alleged assassination of Jose Jesus Marin Vargas, a union member at the same plant who was gunned down on his car ride home less than a year before, and perhaps that suggests an emboldened sentiment among the death squads? It's hard to say. One of the most grievous assassinations among any of the ones that we've found reports of can be associated pretty conveniently with the Chicolac plant in Valle du Par.
We're pretty sure Nestle did this, but let's throw an allegedly here just to save our lawyers from dealing with a cease and desist. That was a joke. We don't have lawyers.
I was going to say, and to prevent us from hiring a lawyer. Now, this plant does milk, which means they have relationships to maintain with farmers in the region, and that has not always gone well. In 2002, a movement began to stir as an effort to help dairy farmers in Colombia who were suffering considerably following Nestle's decision to begin driving prices down by sourcing milk from farmers outside of that region.
Mind you, when a company like Nestle does this, it doesn't quell the suffering of one group outside of the country at the expense of a group inside the country.
Yeah, like when Nestle starts doing business with Mexico, as opposed to doing the same business or working the same operations in the U.S., they are not helping the Mexican workers they are employing.
Yeah, the only people who benefit from a decision like this are usually a handful of larger farmers already favored by Nestle to begin with. The late 2010s gave us a key example of this, when Nestle was revealed to be sourcing milk from a series of dairy farmers in Brazil who had been bulldozing the protected lands of the native Mikey people? Oh, God.
Mikey. I'm sorry. I'm spreading it on thick this episode.
Yeah, we are butchering it today. So you sell your milk for less by stealing the land on which it's cultivated. A strategy available only to those with the means to steal someone else's land.
Pretty much. Like you need some coffers to do something like that. In relation to their staff, Nestle rolled out the hits here as well, reneging on terms that were negotiated with Sinaltrainal, firing large numbers of workers, converting the plant into a camp for paramilitary forces, and so on. Luciano Romero had been leading the union's efforts to combat this activity in 2002, and when Nestle refused to budge, the union went on strike. Now, the strike began in July, and when it did, the death threats began flowing thicker. More and more of them began coming in, targeting Luciano among a handful of other leaders of this strike effort specifically.
And this should come as no surprise. It's what the death squads are there to do. They're called death squads. Yep. It's almost an excuse for their presence. Plant management can't just admit that death squads are being sheltered there to kill people, allegedly. So maybe they're there for defense, or to improve efficiency by helping staff imagine things. Yes, this handgun that I carry with hollow point rounds in it, it's for self-defense, not because I want to kill somebody.
It's to keep things peaceful.
Yeah.
That's what the handgun's for. That's why we have a tank. It's to keep the peace. The Union reported these threats to Nestle in Switzerland. That's Sineltranil. And Nestle in Switzerland did nothing, allegedly. And they reported this to the Nestle subsidiary that owned the plant, who began spreading libelous rumors. That's a quote from one of our sources, that Luciano was part of the guerrilla forces, which, as mentioned earlier, made things a lot fucking worse for Luciano. When the strike failed in October and Luciano and other leaders of the effort were fired, the threats against their lives continued, leading Luciano to ultimately flee the country. Out of state, out of mind. However, in April 2005, Luciano returned and was soon asked to fly to Switzerland to testify on the actions of the paramilitary forces and their connections with Nestle. This testimony would have been heard between October 29th and 30th of 2005. However, Luciano disappeared the month before, and on September 11th, it was discovered that he was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered, apparently finally succumbing to one of the 40 stab wounds present on his annihilated body.
Jesus. I feel like that date is important for some reason, but I forgot.
Honestly, it's good that we remember Luciano. God rest Luciano. Doesn't matter. I can't remember what else happened then. But the point is, he was murdered. Following his death, the investigation of the death threats made against union members was closed, and though Nestle's negligence in this matter was ultimately addressed in court, they were acquitted in that same international court of all charges in May of 2013. So the behavior at these plants continues. And a question arises. Does Nespresso's B Corp status mean that the subsidiary can realistically distance itself from the alleged crimes of Nestle's other subsidiaries?
Chapter 9. Nespresso is a B Corp.
Yes, it is. Now, this is actually comforting to me because George Clooney is an actor I can't help but love. He's got that face, and he's so good in Michael Clayton, and he's in those Nespresso commercials, and I get to be like, look at how far that guy's come. Like 10 years ago, he was robbing casinos, and now look at him. He's on a train to somewhere.
Regardless of whether or not there's any controversy to share here, it's pretty cool that they're willing to assign such important marketing to reformed convicts.
It is. Maybe that's part of like the B Corp thing. But being that Nespresso is a B Corp, where in Colombia do they get their coffee? Well, keep in mind, the B Corp is pretty important for publicity's sake, so it makes good sense for Nestle to make a big show of working on this stuff the right way. As such, since 1998, Nespresso coffee has come from the Bugle Grande plant. Now, Nestle's Bugle Grande plant primarily produces coffee products like Nescafe Artisanal and operates on 100% renewable electricity and transforms coffee waste into 30% of the electricity the operation requires. Basically, the facility just needs a big cup of coffee to get its day started.
The plant just needs to get the sand out of its eyes. This is the worst plant Nestle operates in Colombia.
Yeah, what we're going to cover here are allegations. But if even a few of these are true, the Bugle Grande plant is the worst, and it's not even close. Again, it's a blowout. We've touched on just a few alleged assassinations, but if we're doing our math right here, over 10 can be connected allegedly to this plant alone, with the most recent one happening at the end of April of this year, the year of our Lord 2025. In fact, Nestle's first alleged assassination happened right here as well, where the B Corp coffee company gets its stuff. That's Nespresso. Hector Daniel Useche was murdered in 1986, just 4 years after the union came to be, and since then, the plant has seen hunger strikes, aggressive paramilitary practices, wrongful firings, intimidation, and condemnation from human rights groups the world over. So how the hell is that where Nestle's B Corp gets its coffee? How the hell is this company a B Corp if its workers are getting killed off while they negotiate with their employer?
How indeed?
Well, maybe they just didn't tell B Lab, who offers the certification. You see, B Lab's B Corp, quote unquote, status is obtained via a company self-reporting a score of at least 80 out of 200 on a handful of metrics designed to show positive impact. Now, B Lab verifies, so you can't outright lie, but it's pretty easy to fudge numbers to get as far as you need to, right? The BBC noted that cutting down on single-use plastics and reducing carbon emissions in your supply chain weigh the same as far as B Lab is concerned. And according to experts, the carbon emissions thing is like way more important. But most companies lean hard on the easy stuff. We're using less plastic wrap type thing. Today, over 8,000 companies are certified B Corps. So going forward, I might just suggest ignoring the B Corp certification. What are your thoughts, Money Mike?
It's like the JD Power Awards that like car companies would just give themselves.
Right? And Dodge Ram keeps winning it. And you're like, are you shitting me? Yeah. That's like notoriously the worst truck on the road.
It's like JD Power and Associates favorite truck of 2025. And I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this, pretty sure like a couple years ago it came out that those awards were just purchased and there was no actual objective criteria. And like you saw that and you're like, I feel like we all knew that. Like, why is it always the ones that you most suspect?
Yeah.
You know?
It's news, but it's not a surprise. Like, that comes out and you're like, I mean, duh. The Chrysler 200 was J.D. Power's top pick for 10 years.
And turns out it's not a great car yet. That's like when, like a month ago, when a bunch of women came forward and accused Jared Leto of sexual misconduct. And you were like, oh, that hasn't happened already?
Did we not already do this?
Yeah. Again, why is it always the ones that you suspect the most?
Oh, God. All right.
Chapter 10, the rest.
Now, those who have stayed with us for this long, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. We've built up some hype at the end of the last episode, suggesting that this one was darker, and we didn't cover assassination in the last episode, instead focusing mainly on the problem of forced labor and slavery. And I feel like many of you, and I get this, would say like, okay, but the slavery thing is like worse, isn't it? Like that's the violence inflicted against the union members right now. Like if anything, the slavery thing is the end result of this violence working as intended. But just because there isn't anything suggesting slavery in Colombia in our sources doesn't mean that slavery isn't present in Nestle's coffee supply chain. In fact, though it seems less abundant, where it is present, it's like more severe in a lot of respects, actually. You see children as young as 12 are injuring themselves kind of a lot, swinging machetes and carrying extremely heavy loads while farming for chocolate and getting paid nothing or almost nothing. But in the coffee supply chain, you will find the same precursors, the same sham solutions, nearly identical to the ineffective ones the companies offered for their chocolate supply chain, which seemed to serve really as stall tactics. And you'll see the same slavery, but with children as young as 8 years old. And still, Nestle seemingly ignores the fallout or acts shocked when it's revealed its scale. Farmers in Mexico cultivating Robusto or Arabica beans are barely covering production costs. But what Nestle's global reach means is that if Mexican farmers refuse starvation wages offered by the multinational, it can pay starvation wages to someone on the other side of the planet.
A collapse in the price of required goods means more profit for shareholders. And in the end, that seems to be what really matters.
Yes. It's here that I'm going to make a causational connection that I haven't seen made that often, which surprises me, but I find this attempted cash out to be one of Nestle's most grievous acts. It marks one of the last times media attention has really been able to influence the actions of the company. The media was able to do something here. You see, media coverage is only really effective, I would wage, when it seems like it could be followed by boycotts. And this does move the needle. Boycotts, or the threat of boycotts, moves the needle. Nestle acquired a company in 1986 called the Schweissfurth Group. In 2001, as a means to squeeze as much as possible out of the investment, we can't find how much Nestle spent on the initial purchase, mind you, but they demanded reimbursement from Ethiopia for a portion of Schweissfurth that was nationalized by the country 11 years before Nestle owned this. about $6.5 million. And they brought Ethiopia to court for this capital. Now, mind you, what it means that this part of Schweizwerth was nationalized by Ethiopia before Nestle bought it is that Nestle almost certainly did not pay any extra amount for this piece of the company that was taken off by Ethiopia. Ethiopia, in this moment, mind you, is in the midst of a horrifying crisis and insisted, in response to this demand in court, all the country could afford to offer Nestle was $1.5 million. And this was very likely true. But Nestle persisted on principle. It's just good business. Now, this is often described as a deeply inconsiderate action by Nestle. If Ethiopia is made to pay that money, life-saving food can't be distributed, and plans to build wells so the people of that country have access to drinking water will have to be abandoned. Millions of Ethiopians will die if Ethiopia pays that money. How could a company do that to so many people? Here's the part that I don't hear mentioned that often. Nestle's actions helped bring these people to the brink of death to begin with. You see, a key contributing factor to this crisis was the collapse in coffee prices. Ethiopia, you see, has been a key supplier of Nespresso since 1998, and Nestle has, as mentioned, been the largest player in this area for a long time. Regardless of whether or not Nestle caused this crisis, their actions could have gone a pretty impressive length in helping to eliminate its worst effects. Yet here they are, in 2002, demanding this money in an international court of law for the principle of the thing. Gosh darn it. Then word got out about the affair. You see, even half the story, Nestle inadvertently causing the death of millions in its own supply chain for a measly $6.5 million, is enough to get a fucking movement started. So Nestle pussies out and states, we were never going to demand that amount, like quit being babies. Like we just wanted to have the conversation and make it known $6.5 million was owed. Now, at the start of writing this episode, I felt pretty helpless on the whole boycott front because when you're looking at Nestle's org chart, which is included in our sources, it looks an awful lot like it just isn't possible to boycott this damn company. But as we carried on writing this and I got angrier and angrier, I came up with a desperate idea that I think could be effective. A person combing through and putting together shopping lists that include no product from Nestle is almost certainly going to be paid nothing for the effort to do so and is facing a meticulous, frustrating, and boring task. So maybe we let the computers do this one? This is the one time you will ever hear me advocate for the use of AI. As a podcast, we don't touch AI for anything. But if you can stomach using it, it sure is an excellent solution to figure out how to avoid every single product made by a multinational food company. Create an itemized shopping list that includes all the ingredients for the following 7 meals. Bam, 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 bam. Account for the following dietary restrictions. Bam, bam, bam. Include snack foods like cookies and potato chips, soft drinks, beer, chocolate, and canned vegetables, and include a brand alternative for Nestle products for each required item, and make them price competitive. I've included my list in case the items thereon are satisfactory and you'd prefer to just avoid using that software at all costs. I get it. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We work really hard on this, and you're doing so it really makes a difference. We love you all, and goodbye. All right, what do you think about the AI thing? I came up with the idea, and it actually